The blood-red sunset painted Elko, Nevada like a warning as Sophia James dismounted from the stage-coach, her emerald eyes squinting against the dust kicked up by the departing wheels. The year was 1876, and the mining town stood as a testament to the nation's westward ambitions, sprawling across the high desert landscape with all the ambition and desperation of a frontier settlement. Sophia clutched her valise tightly against her chest, the weight of everything she'd left behind in Boston making her shoulders sag despite her rigid posture. "Madam, you'll be wanting the Silver Crown Hotel," the stagecoach driver called down, pointing toward a 3-story structure that stood taller than most of the ramshackle buildings lining the main street. "Only decent place for a lady in this town." Sophia nodded her thanks, but her gaze had already drifted toward the saloon across the street where raucous laughter spilled out into the evening air. The Gilded Spur, its weathered sign proclaimed, swinging in the hot breeze. Men in dust-caked clothes moved in and out, some stumbling, others walking with the confident stride of those who carried guns and knew how to use them. She hadn't come all this way to stay in a decent place. She'd come to find the man who had stolen her brother's life in a card game gone wrong, a man known only as the Ace of Spades. Her brother's last letter had mentioned Elko, and this saloon specifically. If vengeance had a starting point, it would be there. As Sophia walked toward the hotel, every eye in town seemed to follow her progress. Women dressed as properly as she was in a high-necked traveling dress of deep blue, her chestnut hair pinned neatly beneath a modest hat, were rare in Elko. Most female inhabitants either wore wedding bands or worked in establishments like the Gilded Spur, where respectability wasn't the primary concern. "New blood," a voice drawled from the shadows of an alleyway. "Ain't that interesting?" Sophia quickened her pace, not bothering to acknowledge the comment. She had expected this. Men in frontier towns were often starved for female company, especially women of breeding and education. She'd prepared for their attention. What she hadn't prepared for was the hollow feeling that had settled in her chest since receiving word of Thomas's death. The Silver Crown Hotel proved to be cleaner than its exterior suggested. The lobby, though small, boasted polished wooden floors and a front desk manned by an elderly gentleman with spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "Room for one, please," Sophia said, placing her valise on the counter. The clerk eyed her with undisguised curiosity. "Just yourself, miss." "We don't get many unaccompanied ladies." "My business is my own," she replied firmly, opening her reticule to extract payment. "I'll need the room for at least a week. $2 a night includes breakfast." His eyes narrowed. "You're not one of them actresses, are you?" "Last theater troupe nearly burned the place down with their candles and whatnot. I assure you I am not an actress." Sophia counted out $14, pushing them across the counter. "I would appreciate discretion regarding my presence here." The clerk's brows rose, but he nodded, sliding a key toward her. "Room 204, top of the stairs, end of the hall, best view in the house such as it is." Sophia took the key, grateful that her first interaction had been concluded without further questions. That gratitude evaporated when she turned around and collided with a solid wall of man, her reticule dropping to the floor. "Pardon me, madam," a deep voice rumbled as strong hands steadied her by the shoulders. Sophia looked far up into the face of a man who seemed carved from the same harsh landscape that surrounded Elko. His skin was tanned and weathered, eyes the pale blue of a winter sky, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. A scar ran from his right temple to his jawline, the only imperfection in features that might have been handsome in another life, before the sun and wind had claimed them. "No harm done," she managed, stepping back and smoothing her skirts to hide her discomfort. The man bent to retrieve her reticule, and Sophia noticed the worn leather holster at his hip, the pearl-handled revolver it contained looking as much a part of him as his arm or leg. When he straightened, his black Stetson cast shadows across his face, but she could still see the assessment in his eyes. "You're new to town," he stated rather than asked, handing over her belongings. Zachary Vale, sheriff of this dusty corner of nowhere. He extended a hand, calloused and strong. Sophia hesitated before taking it. Sophia James. She offered no explanation for her presence, hoping her tone would discourage further inquiry. It didn't. What brings a Boston lady to Elko, not exactly a common destination for the Eastern set? Her surprise must have shown because he smiled faintly. Your accent, plus those shoes weren't made for Nevada dirt. Sophia withdrew her hand. I'm visiting a relative, she lied. Nothing that should concern the law. Something in Sheriff Vale's expression shifted, a flicker of what might have been amusement. Everything concerns the law in a town this size, Miss James, especially when it involves someone clearly unused to our ways. He touched the brim of his hat. Enjoy your stay. Should you need assistance, my office is just down the street across from the Gilded Spur. With that, he turned and left, boots echoing on the wooden floor. Sophia watched him go, unnerved by the encounter. Sheriff Zachary Vale had recognized her as an outsider in seconds, and seemed to doubt her stated purpose just as quickly. If she were to find the Ace of Spades and bring him to justice for Thomas's death, she would need to be more convincing. In her room, which was small but clean, Sophia unpacked her few belongings. From a false bottom in her valise, she extracted a Derringer pistol, its mother-of-pearl grip cool against her palm. Thomas had given it to her for protection before he'd left for the West, teaching her to shoot in the garden behind their Boston home while their father was at his law office. The world out there isn't Boston, Soph, he'd warned. A lady might need more than a sharp tongue to keep herself safe. Now Thomas was dead, shot through the heart after being accused of cheating at cards by a man known only by his calling card, the Ace of Spades he'd left pinned to Thomas's coat. The local sheriff in the Wyoming town where it happened had written that the killer had fled, rumored to be heading for Nevada. Sophia placed the Derringer on her nightstand, then moved to the window. Elko sprawled below, its buildings cast in long shadows as the sun completed its descent behind the mountains. The Gilded Spur glowed with lamplight, music drifting faintly up to her window. That's where she would start tomorrow. For now, she needed rest and to gather her thoughts. Sheriff Vale's appearance complicated matters. A lawman with sharp eyes would make her investigation more difficult, especially if he decided to take an interest in her activities. Little did Sophia know, the sheriff was already taking an interest, standing in the street below and watching her silhouette move behind the thin curtains of room 204. The morning brought the scent of sage and dust through Sophia's open window, the Nevada landscape stretching into the distance like a painting of desolation. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown of deep burgundy that wouldn't immediately mark her as an outsider but maintained enough propriety to command respect. Her plan was to visit the Gilded Spur early, before the rougher elements filled it for the evening's entertainment. Breakfast in the hotel dining room was simple fare biscuits, gravy, eggs, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Sophia ate quietly, listening to the conversations around her. Miners discussing claims, merchants tallying shipments, a pair of cowboys debating cattle prices. Nobody mentioned a stranger known for card games or a signature Ace of Spades. More coffee, miss, a young woman in an apron offered, pot in hand. Sophia nodded. Thank you, I was wondering, do you know much about the Gilded Spur? Is it a reputable establishment? The waitress's eyebrows rose slightly. As reputable as a saloon gets in these parts, I suppose. The owner, Mr. Darby, runs a clean game, or so they say. Not that a lady like yourself would have business there. Of course not, Sophia agreed, offering a smile she hoped looked genuine. I merely heard it mentioned and was curious. After breakfast, Sophia set out into the morning heat. Elko was more active now, wagons rattling down the main street, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, a group of children racing past in a game of tag. She walked purposefully as if she had legitimate business, though her heart pounded as she approached the Gilded Spur. Unlike the previous night, the saloon was quiet now. Pushing through the batwing doors, Sophia paused to let her eyes adjust to the dimmer interior. A long bar stretched along one wall, behind which bottles gleamed in the light filtering through grimy windows. Several round tables filled the space, most empty except for one where a card game continued from the night before, the players bleary-eyed and unshaven. A piano stood silent in the corner, and a staircase led to a second floor that Sophia pretended not to notice. She approached the bar, where a man with enormous mustaches polished glasses with a questionable-looking rag. "We don't open to the public till noon, miss," he said, not unkindly but firmly. "I'm looking for information, not spirits," Sophia replied, placing a silver dollar on the bar. "I'm trying to locate a man who might have passed through recently, a gambler." The bartender's expression didn't change, but his hand stopped moving on the glass. "This town sees plenty of gamblers. Got a name? He's known as the Ace of Spades." The stillness that followed told Sophia more than words could have. The card game at the table behind her went quiet, and she sensed rather than saw the players taking notice of her conversation. "Don't know nobody by that handle," the bartender finally said, pushing her coin back across the bar. "But if I was you, I'd be careful asking about such things. Some men don't like being found. Is that why you're returning my money? Because you don't know or because you don't want to tell me?" A new voice spoke from behind her. "It's because Hank here values his life, madam." Sophia turned to find Sheriff Vale leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest. Today, she could see him more clearly in the morning light, tall and broad-shouldered, his badge glinting on his chest, his face a study in controlled neutrality. "Sheriff," she acknowledged, annoyed at the interruption, "Miss James." He pushed off from the doorframe and approached. "Interesting place to start your day, especially for someone visiting a relative." Heat rose in Sophia's cheeks. "My relative isn't an early riser, I was simply exploring the town. In the Gilded Spur, asking about a notorious gunman." His voice remained even, but his eyes had hardened. "The Ace of Spades has killed 7 men that I know of, Miss James, not the sort of figure that comes up in casual conversation." The card players had abandoned any pretense of disinterest, watching the exchange openly now. Sophia lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. "My inquiries are my business, Sheriff. Not in my town, they aren't." He gestured toward the door. "Let's continue this discussion in my office." It wasn't a request. Sophia gathered her dignity around her like a cloak and walked past him, the silver dollar forgotten on the bar. Outside, the morning had grown hotter, the sun beating down mercilessly. Sheriff Vale directed her across the street to a small building with Sheriff painted on a wooden sign above the door. The office was sparse but orderly, a desk piled with papers, a wood stove for winter months, a row of wanted posters on one wall, and 3 cells in the back, all currently empty. Vale closed the door behind them and motioned for her to take a seat in front of his desk. "Now," he said, settling into his chair with a creak of wood, "let's start with the truth this time. Who are you really, and what's your business with the Ace of Spades?" Sophia considered her options. She could continue lying, but something in the sheriff's steady gaze suggested he would see through any falsehood. Perhaps limited honesty was her best strategy. "My name is Sophia James, as I told you. I'm from Boston, also true." She folded her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "I'm looking for the man known as the Ace of Spades because he killed my brother Thomas in a card game in Wyoming 3 months ago. The local law there couldn't or wouldn't pursue him, so I've taken it upon myself." Vale didn't speak for a long moment, studying her face. "And once you find him." "What then? A Boston lady against a killer who's faster on the draw than most men who make their living with a gun. I intend to see him brought to justice." "Justice," Vale repeated, leaning back in his chair. "Out here, that's often measured in lead, Miss James. Are you prepared for that?" Sophia's resolve hardened. "I'm prepared for whatever is necessary to see my brother's killer answer for his crimes." The sheriff sighed, running a hand through his hair, which Sophia noticed was the deep brown of coffee, streaked with premature silver at the temples. "The man you're looking for was here," he finally admitted. "Left about a week ago after nearly killing a minor over an alleged marked card. Hope and disappointment warred within her." "Where did he go?" "I ran him out of town, told him not to return. Word is he headed south toward the border." Vale leaned forward, his expression grave. Miss James, Sophia, go home. This isn't a path that ends well for someone like you. The West devours the unprepared. I'm more prepared than you might think, she countered. And I will not return to Boston until I've completed what I came to do. Something shifted in Vale's expression, not quite respect, but a recognition of her determination. Then at least don't go stumbling around asking questions that could get you killed. If the ace has friends in Elko, and he might, they'll report back that someone's looking for him. And he doesn't take kindly to pursuit. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. What would you suggest? Give me a day or two. I have contacts in the southern settlements who might know more about his whereabouts. He rose, signaling the end of their conversation. In the meantime, stay away from the Gilded Spur and places like it. Stick to the reputable parts of town. As Sophia stood, a question occurred to her. Why would you help me, Sheriff? You don't know me. Vale's face remained impassive, but something flickered in those pale eyes. Because 7 men dead is 7 too many, and because no one else has been willing to track him this far. He opened the door for her. I'll find you at the hotel when I have information. Outside, Sophia blinked in the harsh sunlight, not entirely sure what had just happened. She'd expected to be ordered onto the next stagecoach east, not offered assistance. Sheriff Vale was either a surprisingly principled lawman or had his own reasons for wanting the Ace of Spades found. Either way, she had little choice but to trust him for now. 2 days passed with agonizing slowness. Sophia occupied herself by walking the streets of Elko during daylight hours, familiarizing herself with the town's layout while avoiding the areas Vale had warned against. She wrote letters she had no intention of sending, dined alone in the hotel restaurant, and waited. On the morning of the 3rd day, a knock at her door startled her from reading a month-old newspaper. When she opened it, Sheriff Vale stood in the hallway, his expression grim. "Pack your things," he said without preamble. "He's been spotted in Silver Springs, a day's ride south. We leave in an hour." "We," Sophia echoed, caught off guard. Vale's jaw tightened. "I'm not letting a woman chase after the Ace of Spades alone. Either we go together, or I wire the sheriff in Silver Springs to arrest him before he moves on. And if they can't, then he disappears again and your brother never gets justice." The sheriff's gaze was unwavering. "Your choice, Miss James, 1 hour." With that, he turned and strode down the hall, leaving Sophia staring after him. It took only moments for her to decide. 50 minutes later, she stood outside the livery stable, a small traveling bag in hand, wearing a split riding skirt she'd thankfully had the foresight to pack. Vale appeared leading 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding and a smaller, dappled mare. "Can you ride?" he asked, eyeing her critically. "Better than most men I know," Sophia replied, taking the mare's reins. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We'll see." They rode out of Elko as the town was coming fully to life, attracting curious glances but no questions. Vale set a steady pace, not pushing the horses but moving with purpose. The landscape opened before them, vast and unforgiving, the mountains standing sentinel in the distance. "Tell me about your brother," Vale said after they'd been riding for an hour, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Sophia's throat tightened unexpectedly. Few had asked about Thomas since his death. Most had simply offered platitudes about God's will and moving forward. "He was brilliant," she said finally. "Could have been anything, a doctor, a lawyer like our father, but he had a restlessness in him, always wanting to see what was over the next hill. So he came west. Against everyone's wishes, he wrote home about the mountains, the vast open spaces. Said a man could breathe out here." She adjusted her grip on the reins. "The last letter came 3 weeks before we received word of his death. He mentioned playing cards with a man who wore black gloves and never smiled." Vale nodded. "The ace is known for those gloves. Some say he wears them to hide burn scars. Others think it's to prevent leaving fingerprints on the cards. You seem to know a great deal about him." "I've been tracking him longer than you have," Vale admitted. "Not actively, but keeping tabs. He killed a friend of mine 2 years back in Colorado. A good man with a wife and 3 children." Understanding dawned on Sophia. "That's why you're helping me. You have your own score to settle." "I'm a lawman. I don't settle scores." His tone suggested otherwise. But yes, I've been waiting for an opportunity to bring him in. Legally. They rode in silence again, each absorbed in their own thoughts. By midday, they stopped beside a small stream to rest the horses and eat the provisions Vale had packed: jerky, hard biscuits, and dried apples. "How did you become a sheriff?" Sophia asked as they sat in the meager shade of a juniper tree. "You don't seem—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish without giving offense. Like the usual badge-wearing type, Vale finished for her, his expression unreadable. "I fought in the war," Union sighed. "Afterward, I drifted west like many men who couldn't settle back into normal life. Found myself in Elko when the previous sheriff was killed in a bank robbery. Helped track down the men responsible, and the town council offered me the job." He shrugged. "Turns out I have a talent for keeping order." "And a conscience," Sophia observed. "Not all lawmen would help a woman pursue vengeance." "Justice," he corrected. "And helping you is the right thing to do, even if your methods are unconventional." "Unconventional," she repeated with a hint of amusement. "Is that what they call a woman who refuses to let her brother's murder go unanswered?" Vale studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Most women in your position would have let the men in their family handle it, or accepted that some deaths go unavenged in the West." "I have no men left in my family," Sophia said simply. "Our father died last year. Thomas was all I had." Something shifted in Vale's expression, a softening around the eyes, perhaps, or a slight lowering of the guard he kept so firmly in place. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words held genuine feeling. Sophia looked away, uncomfortable with both his sympathy and her own unexpected reaction to it. "We should continue if we hope to reach Silver Springs by nightfall." They rode hard through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they headed south. The flat terrain gave way to rolling hills dotted with scrub and occasional stands of aspen. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Sophia was grateful for the wide-brimmed hat Vale had insisted she wear. As dusk approached, the outline of Silver Springs appeared in the distance, smaller than Elko, little more than a cluster of buildings serving the nearby mines and ranches. Vale led them to a modest boarding house at the edge of town. "Wait here," he instructed, dismounting and tying both horses to the hitching post. "Let me secure rooms before anyone notices a woman riding into town with the Elko sheriff." Sophia nodded, too weary from the day's journey to argue. Her muscles protested as she shifted in the saddle, unaccustomed to such prolonged riding despite her earlier boast. When Vale returned, he helped her down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her that she attributed to exhaustion. "Mrs. Holloway has 2 rooms available," he said, retrieving their bags from the horses. "She's discreet and won't ask questions, especially after I told her you're my sister, recently widowed, traveling under my protection." "Your sister," Sophia repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Would you prefer I'd told her the truth? A Boston lady and a sheriff hunting a killer together would raise more eyebrows than this town has to spare." His tone was dry, but there was a hint of humor in his eyes. The boarding house was clean and smelled of fresh bread. Mrs. Holloway, a plump woman with kind eyes, showed them to adjacent rooms on the second floor, promising hot water would be brought up shortly. "Supper's at 7, she informed them. "Nothing fancy, but filling." Alone in her room, Sophia sank onto the narrow bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of the day's journey. Her body ached, her skin felt raw from the sun and wind, and doubts that she'd kept at bay began to surface. What was she doing here, hundreds of miles from everything familiar, chasing a killer with a man she barely knew? A soft knock at the door roused her from these thoughts. "Miss James," Vale's voice came through the wood. "Supper in 10 minutes if you're joining me." "I'll be there," she called back, rising with effort to splash water on her face and attempt to make herself presentable. The dining room held only one other guest, an elderly man who nodded politely before returning to his meal. Vale was already seated at a small table in the corner, his back to the wall, giving him a clear view of both the main entrance and the kitchen door. The habit of a man who'd learned vigilance the hard way, Sophia thought, as she joined him, Mrs. Holloway brought out plates heaped with beef stew and cornbread, along with mugs of strong coffee. "I asked around discreetly while you were freshening up," Vale said quietly once their hostess had retreated to the kitchen. "Our man was here 2 days ago, staying at the saloon down the street. Left yesterday heading toward Carson City, according to the bartender. Disappointment washed over Sophia, so we've missed him again. We're closing the gap," Vale pointed out, "and Carson City isn't far. We can reach it tomorrow if we start early. And if he's moved on from there." Vale's expression hardened. "Then we keep following. He's bound to stop somewhere, and when he does—" He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. They ate in companionable silence, the stew far better than Sophia had expected. As they finished, Vale leaned forward, lowering his voice further. "There's something you should know before we continue," he said, his expression grave. "The Ace of Spades isn't just a card sharp with a quick temper. He's methodical, calculating. The men he's killed weren't all in the heat of argument. Some were hunted down days after their encounters with him." A chill ran through Sophia. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying he's dangerous in ways beyond what you might be expecting. And if he learns someone's tracking him, especially the sister of a man he killed, he might decide to eliminate the threat. All the more reason to find him before he realizes we're coming," Sophia replied, meeting Vale's gaze steadily. Vale studied her for a long moment. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolhardy. Perhaps both," she conceded with a small smile. "But I won't be turned back, Sheriff, not when we're this close." Something changed in Vale's expression, a subtle shift she couldn't quite identify. "Zachary," he said. "If we're supposed to be siblings, you should probably use my given name." "Zachary," she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "And you should call me Sophia," he nodded, finishing his coffee. "Get some rest, Sophia. Dawn comes early out here." In her room, preparing for bed, Sophia found herself thinking about the sheriff, about Zachary. He wasn't what she'd expected to find in this harsh land. Behind the weather-beaten exterior and professional detachment, there was intelligence, principle, and perhaps even kindness. Qualities that seemed at odds with the brutal landscape and the lawless reputation of the frontier. Sleep came surprisingly easily, her exhausted body overruling her active mind. Her dreams were a confusion of images: Thomas laughing, cards fluttering through the air, and pale blue eyes watching her from beneath the brim of a black hat. Morning arrived with Mrs. Holloway's soft knock and the scent of coffee wafting up the stairs. Sophia dressed quickly in her riding clothes, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. When she descended to the dining room, Vale Zachary was already there, studying a map spread on the table. "Carson City's here," he said by way of greeting, pointing to a spot on the map. "About 6 hours' ride, depending on the trail conditions. There's a stage road most of the way, which makes for easier travel." Sophia nodded, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Holloway offered. "What's our plan when we get there?" "Carson's bigger than Elko territorial capital, lots of people coming and going. We'll need to be more strategic." He folded the map. "I know the sheriff there, Will Harmon, good man. I'll speak with him first, see if our target's been spotted. And if he has," Zachary's expression turned grim. "Then we move carefully. The ace won't be taken easily, and I'd prefer to avoid a public confrontation if possible." They left Silver Springs as the sun crested the eastern mountains, the morning cool enough that Sophia was grateful for the woolen jacket she wore over her riding clothes. The trail to Carson City took them through more varied terrain: rocky outcroppings, stands of pine, and occasional meadows where wildflowers added splashes of color to the landscape. Zachary rode slightly ahead, alert to every sound and movement. Watching him, Sophia was struck by how naturally he fit into this environment, as if he'd been shaped by the same forces that had carved the mountains and valleys around them. By contrast, she felt conspicuously out of place, a fact that troubled her more than she cared to admit. They stopped briefly around midday to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch beside a small creek. Sophia found herself studying Zachary when he wasn't looking the way he moved with efficient grace, the watchfulness that never seemed to leave him even in moments of apparent relaxation. "You're staring," he observed without turning around, his back to her as he checked his horse's hooves. Heat rushed to Sophia's cheeks. "I was thinking about," he straightened, finally looking at her with those unsettling blue eyes. "How different our lives are," she admitted. "A month ago, I was attending concerts in literary salons in Boston. Now I'm riding through the Nevada desert with a sheriff I barely know, hunting a killer." A faint smile curved his lips. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns out here. The West doesn't care about your plans or expectations." "So I'm learning." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind since they'd left Elko. "Why are you really doing this, Zachary? It can't just be about bringing in a wanted man. You could have wired other sheriffs, organized a proper manhunt." The smile vanished, replaced by something more guarded. "Maybe I recognize the look of someone who's lost everything that mattered. Maybe I know what it's like to need answers that no one else seems interested in providing." He turned back to his horse. "We should keep moving." The conversation died there, but Sophia felt as though she'd glimpsed something beneath the sheriff's carefully maintained facade, a wound as raw and real as her own grief for Thomas. It made him suddenly more human, more approachable. The remainder of their journey passed mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Carson City appeared in the valley below them, significantly larger than either Elko or Silver Springs, with proper streets, substantial buildings, and the unmistakable signs of territorial government. "We'll stable the horses at the Silver Dollar Hotel," Zachary decided as they approached the outskirts of town. "It's respectable enough that you won't draw unwanted attention, but not so fancy that people will ask questions about a dusty sheriff and his companion." The hotel proved to be a 3-story affair with painted trim and actual glass windows, luxurious by the standards Sophia had grown accustomed to since leaving Boston. The stable boy who took their horses gave Zachary a curious look, but asked no questions when handed a coin for his trouble. Inside, the lobby boasted polished floors, a crystal chandelier, and a desk clerk who eyed Sophia's riding attire with barely concealed disapproval. "2 rooms, please," Zachary said, placing money on the counter. "Adjoining, if possible." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Your names, sir?" "Zachary Vale, Sheriff of Elko County. This is my—" He hesitated, glancing at Sophia. "Wife," she supplied smoothly, stepping forward to place her hand on Zachary's arm. "Sophia Vale, we're recently married." She felt Zachary stiffen beneath her touch, but to his credit, his expression remained neutral. The clerk's demeanor changed immediately, his earlier suspicion replaced by a deferential smile. "Of course, Mrs. Vale. We're honored to host the sheriff and his bride. I have a lovely corner suite available on the 2nd floor, 1-bedroom, but with a separate sitting area. Much more appropriate for newlyweds than 2 adjoining rooms." Before Zachary could protest, Sophia squeezed his arm in warning. "That sounds perfect, doesn't it, darling?" The look he gave her promised a reckoning later, but he nodded. "Whatever my wife prefers." The suite was indeed lovely, with tall windows overlooking the main street, a small settee and writing desk in the sitting area, and through an archway, a large bed with an actual feather mattress. Sophia moved to the window, avoiding Zachary's gaze as the bellboy deposited their bags and departed with a tip. "Wife?" Zachary asked as soon as they were alone, his tone caught between annoyance and amusement. Sophia turned to face him, chin lifted. "It's more believable than siblings, given our obvious lack of family resemblance. And a married woman traveling with her husband raises fewer questions than any other arrangement we might have claimed." "And the single room, I'll take the settee," she said promptly. "You need proper rest more than I do, considering you'll likely be the one facing the Ace of Spades when we find him." Zachary's expression softened slightly. "That's not necessary. I've slept in far worse places than a comfortable settee." Before Sophia could argue, a knock at the door interrupted them. Zachary's hand moved instinctively to his holster as he approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" he called. "Will Harmon, Carson City Sheriff's Office," came the reply. "Heard you were asking about me at the front desk, Vale." Zachary relaxed, opening the door to reveal a stocky man with a graying mustache and the same watchful eyes that seemed common to all lawmen out west. "Will," Zachary greeted him, extending a hand. "Appreciate you coming so quickly." Harmon shook his hand, gaze moving past him to Sophia. "Didn't know you'd gotten hitched, Vale. Congratulations are in order, I suppose." "Thank you," Sophia said before Zachary could correct him, moving forward to offer her own hand. "I'm Sophia. It's a pleasure to meet you, Sheriff Harmon." Confusion flickered briefly across Zachary's face before understanding dawned. Maintaining their cover story might be prudent, at least until they knew whom they could trust. "We're tracking a fugitive," he said, bringing the conversation back to business. "Goes by the Ace of Spades. Heard he might have passed through Carson recently." Harmon's expression darkened. "That snake, yeah, he was here 3 days ago, cleaned out half the miners at the Golden Nugget, then disappeared before I could run him off. Word is he headed west toward Virginia City. The big game there would appeal to him." Hope surged through Sophia. Virginia City, with its famous Comstock-Lode silver mines and legendary saloons, was less than a day's journey from Carson City. "Any incidents while he was here?" Zachary asked, his tone carefully neutral. "No deaths, if that's what you're asking, but he left a young prospector with knife wounds that might still prove fatal." Harmon shook his head. "I'd love to see that bastard swing. You tracking him officially?" "Yes and no," Zachary admitted. "He killed a man in Wyoming Territory, Sophia's brother. I'm helping her see justice done." Harmon's gaze moved between them, understanding dawning. "So the marriage is a convenience," Sophia finished smoothly, "for traveling purposes." The older sheriff nodded, seeming relieved at not having been deceived. "Smart, safer that way." He turned back to Zachary. "Virginia City's rough country, Vale. The mining companies run things there more than any law. If you're going after him, you'll need backup." "Are you offering?" Harmon shook his head regretfully. "Can't leave my post." "But I know a man in Virginia City, former Texas Ranger named Isaiah Fletcher. Runs security for one of the smaller mines now, but he's solid. I'll wire ahead, tell him to expect you." "Appreciate it," Zachary said, genuine gratitude in his voice. After Harmon departed, promising to send any additional information he might gather, a heavy silence fell between Sophia and Zachary. The realization that they were closing in on the Ace of Spades brought both anticipation and anxiety. "We should eat and rest," Zachary finally said, moving to gather his hat. "The dining room here is supposed to be good. Then tomorrow we'll head for Virginia City at first light." Sophia nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what they were undertaking. The Ace of Spades had killed at least 7 men, possibly more. He was ruthless, skilled with both cards and weapons, and surrounded by the lawless atmosphere of a mining boomtown. What chance did she really have of bringing him to justice? As if reading her thoughts, Zachary paused at the door. "We're going to find him, Sophia, and when we do, he'll answer for what he's done. I promise you that." The certainty in his voice steadied her, as did the use of her given name. Somehow, in the course of their journey, Zachary Vale had become more than just a convenient ally. He'd become someone she trusted, perhaps even relied upon. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. "I know," she replied, forcing confidence into her voice. "And I'm ready for whatever comes next." The dining room of the Silver Dollar Hotel was more elegant than Sophia had expected, with white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and a small orchestra playing quietly in the corner. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt a pang of homesickness for the civilization she'd left behind. Zachary looked uncomfortable in these refined surroundings, though he handled himself with the same quiet competence he showed in all things. They were seated at a corner table, and a waiter promptly appeared to take their order. "The best meal you've got," Zachary told him, "and a bottle of your finest wine." Sophia raised an eyebrow as the waiter departed. "Wine? I wouldn't have taken you for a connoisseur." "I'm not," he admitted with a faint smile. "But if we're heading into Virginia City tomorrow to face a killer, we might as well enjoy what might be our last civilized meal." The grim humor caught her off guard, and Sophia found herself laughing softly. "That's hardly reassuring, Sheriff." "Wasn't meant to be." His expression grew serious. "Virginia City is different from Elko or even Carson. It's a place where money talks louder than law, and a man like the Ace thrives in that environment. We'll need to be even more careful." "I understand," Sophia said, sobering. "And I appreciate your honesty. Too many men would try to shield me from the reality of our situation." Zachary studied her thoughtfully. "You're not like most women I've encountered, Sophia James. I'll take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. He paused as the waiter returned with their wine, pouring 2 glasses before retreating. Zachary raised his glass slightly. "To Justice, to Thomas," Sophia added quietly, touching her glass to his. The wine was excellent, as was the meal that followed: roast beef with vegetables, fresh bread, and a chocolate dessert that reminded Sophia of the fine restaurants in Boston. Throughout dinner, she found herself watching Zachary, noticing the way the candlelight softened the hard angles of his face, how his eyes seemed to catch and hold the flame. "You're staring again," he observed, a hint of amusement in his voice. Sophia didn't look away this time. "I was wondering about your life before Elko. You mentioned the war, but nothing before that." Zachary took a slow sip of his wine, considering. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Pennsylvania, son of a blacksmith. Decent education, enough to read law books and write reports. Enlisted when the war came, saw things no man should see." His voice had grown distant. "After Appomattox, I couldn't go back home. Too many ghosts, so I headed west like countless other restless souls. And never looked back. Nothing to look back to." He set down his glass. "What about you?" "Boston society must be a far cry from chasing killers across Nevada." Sophia smiled faintly. "My mother died when I was young. Father raised Thomas and me with books and ideas rather than social expectations. He wanted his daughter educated as thoroughly as his son, which scandalized most of Boston society." Her smile faded. "When Thomas decided to come west, Father was heartbroken. When he died last year, I think it was partly from that grief. And you came looking for your brother." "Too late," she whispered, the familiar ache of loss rising in her chest. "By the time I arrived in Wyoming, he was 3 weeks in his grave. The local sheriff gave me his personal effects and suggested I return east where I belonged." Zachary's jaw tightened. "Some men don't understand that grief doesn't recognize gender or geography." "You do," Sophia observed, meeting his gaze. "Why is that?" For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly she had to lean forward to hear him, he said, "Because I've buried everyone I ever loved. Parents, comrades, a wife and child." The revelation struck Sophia like a physical blow. "Zachary, I'm so sorry, I didn't know." "Few do." He finished his wine, his expression closed once more. "It was a fever that took them, Emma and our son, barely a year old. I was away hunting outlaws along the Colorado border by the time I returned." He shook his head. "That's when I took the job in Elko, needed somewhere new, somewhere without memories." Understanding dawned on Sophia, his earlier words about recognizing someone who had lost everything, his willingness to help her quest for justice, the loneliness she sometimes glimpsed behind his carefully maintained control. "Is that why you agreed to help me?" she asked gently. "Because you know what it's like to need closure," partly, he admitted, "but also because it's the right thing to do, and because—" He hesitated, then seemed to change his mind about what he'd been about to say, "because no one should have to face something like this alone." The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken emotions. Sophia found herself acutely aware of Zachary not just as a sheriff or traveling companion, but as a man, one who understood loss and pain as intimately as she did, who carried his burdens with quiet dignity. "We should return to the room," he said finally, breaking the tension. "Dawn comes early, and Virginia City is a hard ride." In the suite, the single bedroom presented the awkwardness they'd temporarily forgotten during dinner. Zachary immediately gathered extra blankets from the wardrobe and began arranging them on the settee. "I meant what I said earlier," Sophia protested. "You should take the bed. You're taller, and you'll need to be rested if we're facing danger tomorrow." "I've slept on worse than this," he replied, not looking up from his task. "Trust me." Something in his tone suggested the matter wasn't open for discussion, so Sophia retreated to the bedroom, closing the door partially but not completely. As she changed into her nightgown, she found herself thinking about their conversation at dinner about the revelations Zachary had shared and the connection she felt growing between them. It was inappropriate, she knew. Their partnership was temporary, formed for a specific purpose. Once the Ace of Spades was brought to justice, they would return to their separate lives, she to Boston, he to Elko. Any deeper feelings would only complicate an already dangerous situation. Yet as she lay in the comfortable bed, listening to the soft sounds of Zachary settling on the settee in the next room, Sophia couldn't deny the truth. In this man, she'd found something she hadn't expected: understanding, respect, perhaps even the beginnings of something more. Whether anything could come of it remained to be seen, but the realization itself was both terrifying and exhilarating. Sleep eluded her for hours as her mind raced with thoughts of justice, revenge, and pale blue eyes that seemed to see through her carefully constructed defenses. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the curtains as Sophia woke to the sound of movement in the sitting room. Dressing quickly in her riding clothes, she emerged to find Zachary already prepared for their journey, checking his revolver with practiced efficiency. "I ordered breakfast," he said by way of greeting. "Should be here shortly. Best to eat well before heading out." Sophia nodded, noticing the dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd slept no better than she had. "Did Sheriff Harmon send any additional information overnight?" "A note was delivered earlier. His contact in Virginia City will meet us at the International Hotel around noon." Zachary holstered his weapon. He also confirmed that the Ace is still there, apparently planning to stay for a high-stakes game tomorrow night. Hope surged through Sophia. "Then we have time to formulate a plan to catch him unawares." "That's the idea," Zachary agreed, though his expression remained grave. "But Virginia City isn't like other places we've been. It's rowdier, more dangerous. The silver mines attract all types, and money flows like water along with blood, when necessary." A knock announced the arrival of their breakfast: eggs, ham, biscuits, and coffee, all served on fine china that seemed at odds with their impending journey. They ate quickly, neither speaking much, the weight of the day ahead hanging between them. As they prepared to leave, Zachary unexpectedly reached out, catching Sophia's arm gently. "I need to be clear about something before we go any further," he said, his expression serious. "When we find the Ace, this becomes a matter for the law. No personal vengeance, no interference. I can't protect you if you take matters into your own hands." Sophia met his gaze steadily. "I came for justice, Zachary, not to become a killer myself. I trust you to do what's right." Relief flickered across his features and he nodded. "Good, then let's go end this." The ride to Virginia City took them up into the mountains, the trail growing steeper and more challenging as they ascended. The landscape changed dramatically, pine forests giving way to rocky outcroppings, the air growing thinner and cooler with each mile. By mid-morning, they crested a ridge and Virginia City sprawled before them, a sprawling collection of buildings clinging to the side of Mount Davidson. Even from a distance, Sophia could see the evidence of the silver mines that had made the city famous: headframes dotting the hillsides, smoke rising from processing mills, wagons moving along the streets like ants in a disturbed hill. "Impressive, isn't it?" Zachary said, pausing to let their horses rest. "More money comes out of those mines in a month than most towns see in a year, and where there's money, there's corruption," Sophia finished, understanding. "Is that why the Ace comes here, for the rich pickings?" Zachary nodded. "Men like him are drawn to places where morality is flexible and wealth is flaunted. Perfect hunting ground for a card sharp with a talent for violence." They continued down into the city, the noise and activity growing with each yard they descended. Virginia City proved to be unlike any place Sophia had yet seen in the West, a strange combination of frontier rawness and unexpected sophistication. The main street boasted brick buildings, plate glass windows, and signs advertising not just saloons and gambling halls, but also theaters, restaurants, and even a French millinery. Yet alongside these refinements were the unmistakable markers of a mining boomtown, muddy streets crowded with wagons and pack animals, roughly dressed miners moving in groups from boarding house to saloon, and the constant rumble and clang of the mines operating day and night. The International Hotel rose above this chaos, a 4-story structure of brick and stone that would not have looked out of place in San Francisco or even New York. Zachary led them to the stable behind the hotel, where they left their horses in the care of a young, stable hand who seemed unfazed by the arrival of an armed sheriff and a woman in riding clothes. "Remember," Zachary said quietly as they approached the hotel entrance, "we're maintaining our cover as husband and wife. The fewer people who know our true purpose here, the better." Sophia nodded, adjusting her hat and smoothing her skirts as best she could after the dusty ride. "Do you think the Ace might have informants watching for pursuers?" "It's possible. A man in his line of work develops a sense for danger, and if he's planning a big game tomorrow night, he'll be particularly alert to anything unusual." Zachary offered his arm, which Sophia took. "Just follow my lead." The lobby of the International was opulent by Western standards: polished floors, velvet upholstery, and a crystal chandelier that caught the light streaming through tall windows. Despite their travel-worn appearance, they were greeted courteously by the desk clerk, who directed them to the hotel restaurant when Zachary inquired about meeting Isaiah Fletcher. Fletcher proved to be a lean, weathered man in his 50s, with a shock of white hair and the alert eyes of someone who'd spent decades watching for trouble. He rose as they approached his table, nodding to Zachary before turning a curious gaze on Sophia. "Mrs. Vale, I presume," he said, extending a hand. "Will Harmon mention the sheriff had married recently? My congratulations." "Thank you," Sophia replied, maintaining their cover as she shook his hand. Once they were seated and had ordered coffee, Fletcher leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Harmon's wire said you're tracking the Ace of Spades. Bold move coming into his territory." "He killed my brother," Sophia said simply, "and others. It's time someone stopped him." Fletcher's gaze sharpened with new respect. "I see the steel in you, madam. Good, you'll need it." He turned to Zachary. "The man you're looking for is staying at the Silverado Hotel, 3 blocks from here. Been there 4 days now, keeping relatively quiet except for a few smaller games. Word is he's waiting for tomorrow night big game at the Imperial Palace with some mining executives and a couple of professional gamblers from San Francisco. Perfect opportunity to make a significant haul before moving on," Zachary observed. "Exactly." Fletcher took a sip of his coffee. "He usually travels with at least 2 men bodyguards, though they pretend to be fellow gamblers. Mean-looking fellows, one tall and thin, the other built like a bear. Both armed." Sophia felt her heart sink slightly. "1 killer was challenge enough. 3 would make their task significantly more difficult." "Any idea of his routine?" Zachary asked. "Times he might be separated from his companions," Fletcher nodded. "That's why I suggested meeting here. He comes to this restaurant every day around 2 o'clock, eats alone at that corner table." He indicated a spot near the back with a slight tilt of his head. "Says the food reminds him of New Orleans. The bodyguards wait outside hotel policy, no weapons in the dining room except for law enforcement." Zachary's expression showed the first hint of optimism Sophia had seen since they'd arrived in Virginia City. "That might be our best opportunity, if we can approach him while he's alone." "It's risky," Fletcher warned. "He's never unarmed, no matter what the rules say. And the bodyguards are just outside the door. Still, it's better than trying to take him at the Silverado, where he controls the environment," Zachary reasoned. "Or during the big game tomorrow when innocent bystanders could be hurt." They discussed the options further, with Fletcher providing additional details about the layout of the restaurant, potential escape routes, and the local law enforcement situation, which proved to be minimal at best, with the city marshal more interested in protecting mining interests than pursuing justice. "I can provide backup," Fletcher offered. Get a couple of my men from the mine to help. We could position ourselves strategically, cover all exits. Zachary nodded gratefully. That would help even the odds, but I need to be clear I want him alive if possible. He needs to stand trial for what he's done. Understood, Fletcher agreed, though his expression suggested he thought this unlikely. Meet me at the Silver Baron Saloon at noon tomorrow. We'll go over final details then. He drained his coffee and stood. Until then, keep a low profile. Virginia City has eyes everywhere, and information is a commodity like any other here. After Fletcher departed, Sophia and Zachary remained at their table, both lost in thought. The reality of what they were planning, confronting a notorious killer in a public restaurant, had suddenly become very immediate. "Are you having second thoughts?" Zachary asked quietly, studying her face. Sophia shook her head. "No, but I am realizing the magnitude of what we're undertaking. This isn't just about Thomas anymore, it's about all the men the Ace has killed and those he might kill in the future if we don't stop him." "It's not too late to step back," Zachary said, his tone serious. "You could wait at the hotel while Fletcher and I handle the arrest." "Absolutely not," Sophia replied firmly. "I didn't come all this way to hide in a hotel room while others finish what I started. Besides," she added with a small smile, "who would maintain our cover as newlyweds if I weren't with you?" Zachary's expression softened slightly. "You're remarkably stubborn, Sophia James, so I've been told." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. "What happens after, if we succeed, I mean?" The question hung between them, laden with implications beyond the immediate concern of capturing the Ace of Spades. Zachary's gaze held hers for a long moment before he replied. "One step at a time," he said finally. "First, we focus on tomorrow, then we'll see where the trail leads next." It wasn't really an answer, but Sophia understood his reluctance to look beyond their current dangerous task. Still, she couldn't help wondering if their paths would continue together once justice had been served, or if they would return to their separate lives as originally planned. The remainder of the day passed in tense anticipation. They took a room at the International, maintaining their married disguise, and spent the afternoon walking through Virginia City, familiarizing themselves with the layout of the streets around the hotel and restaurant. Zachary pointed out potential trouble spots and escape routes with the practiced eye of a lawman, while Sophia committed everything to memory, determined to be prepared for any eventuality. As evening fell, they dined in their room, neither particularly hungry but recognizing the need to keep up their strength for the confrontation ahead. Afterward, as Zachary cleaned his revolver and checked his ammunition, Sophia found herself drawn to the window, watching the lamps being lit along the bustling street below. "Are you afraid?" she asked suddenly, not turning from the view behind her. She heard Zachary pause in his preparations. "Only a fool wouldn't be," he replied honestly. "The Ace has killed men who were expecting trouble, who were armed and ready, but fear is useful if you don't let it control you." Sophia nodded, understanding. She was afraid, terrified, if she were honest with herself, but beneath the fear was a steady determination that had sustained her through the long journey from Boston to this moment. "I keep thinking about Thomas," she said quietly. "About how he died alone, far from home, with no one to defend him or comfort him in his final moments." Zachary's footsteps crossed the room, and then he was beside her at the window, his presence solid and reassuring. "Tomorrow we make it right, not just for Thomas, but for all of them." Sophia turned to face him, suddenly acutely aware of how close they were standing. In the lamplight, his face seemed softer, the lines of hardship and grief less pronounced. Without thinking, she reached up to touch the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. "How did you get this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zachary stood very still, his eyes never leaving hers. "Cavalry saber at Gettysburg. I was lucky an inch closer, and I wouldn't be here." Her fingers traced the line of the scar gently. "We've both survived things that should have destroyed us. Lost people we thought we couldn't live without." "Yes," he agreed, his voice rough, "and yet here we are." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions and possibilities. Then, with obvious reluctance, Zachary stepped back, breaking the connection. "We should rest," he said, his professional demeanor returning. "Tomorrow will require all our focus and strength." Sophia nodded, letting her hand fall back to her side. "Of course. Good night, Zachary." As she prepared for bed in the adjoining room, Sophia tried to sort through the confusing emotions that had been building since they'd left Elko together. What had begun as a partnership of convenience, a means to an end, had become something far more complex. She admired Zachary's integrity, his quiet strength, the compassion that lay beneath his stern exterior. And beyond admiration was a growing attraction that she knew was reciprocated despite his careful restraint. But tomorrow they would face a killer, and one or both of them might not survive the encounter. It was hardly the time to be contemplating romantic entanglements. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with images of Thomas, the Ace of Spades and blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Morning brought clear skies and a cool breeze down from the mountains, a beautiful day that seemed at odds with the dangerous task that lay ahead. Sophia dressed with particular care, choosing a gown of dark blue that would allow freedom of movement while still maintaining their cover as a respectable married couple. Zachary was already awake and dressed when she emerged from her room, looking as if he'd slept little. He wore his badge openly now, a declaration of intent that couldn't be misinterpreted. "Ready?" he asked simply. Sophia nodded, drawing strength from his calm certainty. "Yes." They took breakfast in their room, neither speaking much, each lost in their own preparations, Zachary's physical, Sophia's mental. At precisely noon, they left the International Hotel and made their way to the Silver Baron Saloon, where Fletcher was waiting with two other men, both with the hard look of former lawmen who'd found more profitable employment with the mining companies. "Jackson and Reeves," Fletcher introduced them. "Both good men in a tight spot. Jackson will take position inside the restaurant, posing as a customer. Reeves will cover the back exit. I'll handle the bodyguards outside the front door." "And I'll make the actual arrest," Zachary concluded, checking his revolver one final time before returning it to its holster. "Sophia will accompany me into the restaurant to maintain our cover." Fletcher frowned slightly. "Are you sure about bringing Mrs. Vale into the confrontation? It could turn ugly fast." "I'm not just coming along for appearances," Sophia said before Zachary could answer. "The Ace of Spades killed my brother. I have a right to be there when he's brought to justice." Fletcher studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But stay behind your husband when the moment comes. The Ace is known to be unpredictable when cornered." They spent the next hour reviewing the plan in detail, discussing contingencies and signals. By the time they finished, it was approaching 2 o'clock, the hour when, according to Fletcher's information, the Ace of Spades would arrive for his daily meal. "Remember," Zachary said as they prepared to leave the saloon, "our primary goal is to take him alive to stand trial. Only if he leaves no alternative do we resort to lethal force." Fletcher and his men nodded, though Sophia sensed they had fewer reservations about killing the Ace than Zachary did. As a lawman, he was bound by certain principles. As private security for mining interests, Fletcher and his companions operated under different rules. They separated outside the saloon, each moving to their assigned positions. Sophia and Zachary walked arm in arm toward the International Hotel, maintaining their newlywed appearance while scanning the streets for any sign of their target. "There," Zachary murmured, nodding subtly toward the hotel entrance. "Black suit, gray vest, gloves, that's him." Sophia's heart seemed to stop for a moment as she caught sight of the man who had killed her brother. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, with sharp features and a meticulously groomed appearance that set him apart from the rougher elements of Virginia City. As Fletcher had described, two men flanked him, one tall and lanky, the other broad as a barn door, both openly armed. "Steady," Zachary cautioned, feeling her tense beside him. "Let him enter the restaurant first. We'll follow after he's seated." They waited across the street, pretending to examine the wares in a shop window while watching the Ace and his companions approach the hotel. As expected, The bodyguards remained outside when their employer entered the restaurant. "Now," Zachary said, guiding Sophia across the street with a hand at the small of her back. As they approached, Fletcher appeared from around the corner, engaging the bodyguards in conversation, asking directions, Sophia guessed, from the way he was gesturing up the street. The distraction worked. Neither man paid particular attention to the well-dressed couple entering the restaurant. Inside, the dining room was moderately busy with the luncheon crowd. Sophia spotted Jackson already seated at a table near the door, a newspaper hiding his face. And there, at the corner table Fletcher had identified, sat the Ace of Spades, studying a menu with the casual air of a man without a care in the world. Zachary led them to a table that offered a direct line to their target, seating Sophia so that her back was to the ace before taking the chair opposite her. His expression remained pleasantly neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his right hand stayed close to his holster beneath his coat. A waiter approached, and Zachary ordered coffee for both of them, his voice betraying none of the anticipation Sophia felt coursing through her veins. This was the moment they'd been working toward since leaving Elko, the culmination of her journey from Boston, driven by grief and the need for justice. "When?" she whispered once the waiter had gone. "Let him place his order first," Zachary replied quietly. "He'll be more relaxed, less expecting trouble." They waited in tense silence as the waiter returned to the Ace's table, took his order, and departed again. The killer looked entirely at ease, sipping water and glancing occasionally at a pocket watch as if his only concern was whether his meal would arrive on time. "Now," Zachary said, rising from his chair with fluid grace, "stay behind me." Sophia followed as he moved deliberately toward the corner table, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone in the restaurant must hear it. The ace glanced up as they approached, mild curiosity in his expression that quickly transformed into wariness as he noted Zachary's badge. "Sir," Zachary said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by those nearby but not to cause a general disturbance, "I'm Sheriff Zachary Vale of Elko County. You're under arrest for the murders of Thomas James, William Hargrove, and at least 5 other men across 3 territories." The ace's face showed no surprise, only a cold calculation as his gaze flicked from Zachary to Sophia and back. "You're a long way from Elko, Sheriff," he observed, his voice carrying the faintest hint of a southern drawl. "And this lady doesn't look like a deputy." "I'm Thomas James's sister," Sophia said, stepping forward despite Zachary's warning to stay behind him. "You killed him in Wyoming over a card game you accused him of cheating at." A flicker of recognition crossed the ace's features, followed by a smile that held no warmth. "Ah, yes. The Boston boy with more education than sense." He shrugged elegantly. He should have known better than to try marking cards against a professional. Rage surged through Sophia, hot and blinding. "He never cheated at anything in his life. You're a liar as well as a murderer." The ace's smile didn't waver. "Believe what you wish, Miss James. It matters little now." His gaze shifted back to Zachary. "I assume you have some plan for getting me past my associates outside. They're rather protective." "Your bodyguards are occupied," Zachary replied, his hand now openly resting on his holster. "Stand up slowly and place your hands on the table. You're coming with us to face justice for your crimes." For a moment, it seemed the ace might comply. He set down his water glass carefully, his expression thoughtful rather than concerned. Then, with a movement so swift it was almost imperceptible, his hand dropped below the table. "Gun," Zachary shouted, pushing Sophia to the side as he drew his own weapon. Chaos erupted in the restaurant, diners screaming and diving for cover, waiters dropping trays, Jackson leaping to his feet with revolver drawn. But the ace was already moving, flipping the heavy wooden table toward Zachary while drawing a small derringer from a concealed wrist holster. The shot came so quickly that Sophia barely registered it before Zachary grunted in pain, staggering backward as blood bloomed on his left shoulder. Despite the wound, he managed to fire his own weapon, the bullet splintering the edge of the overturned table as the ace darted toward the kitchen. Stay here, Zachary ordered Sophia, already in pursuit despite his injury. But the ace had other plans. Instead of continuing toward the kitchen, he abruptly changed direction, grabbing Sophia by the arm and pressing the derringer to her temple before Zachary or Jackson could react. "Drop your weapons, gentlemen," he commanded, his voice as calm as if he were suggesting a bet at cards or the lady joins her brother. Zachary froze, his revolver still raised but his expression stricken as he looked at Sophia. Blood soaked the left side of his shirt, but he seemed to have forgotten the wound entirely, focused solely on the scene before him. "Let her go," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is between you and the law." "On the contrary," the ace replied, "it seems the lady has made it quite personal, traveling all this way for revenge, quite the devoted sister." He tightened his grip on Sophia's arm. "Now drop the gun, Sheriff, or we'll see if family resemblance extends to dying expressions." Sophia met Zachary's gaze over the barrel of his revolver, silently willing him to understand. She wasn't helpless, wasn't willing to be used as a shield for her brother's killer. As Zachary hesitated, torn between his duty as a lawman and his evident concern for her safety, she made her decision. With a sudden, violent movement, Sophia drove her elbow backward into the ace's stomach, simultaneously wrenching her head away from the derringer. The gambler grunted in surprise, his grip loosening just enough for her to twist away as Zachary lunged forward. The next few seconds were a blur of movement and sound. Zachary tackling the ace, the derringer discharging with a sharp crack, Jackson rushing forward to help subdue the struggling killer. Somewhere outside, shouting suggested that Fletcher and Reeves were dealing with the bodyguards. And then, abruptly, it was over. The ace lay face down on the restaurant floor, Zachary's knee in his back as Jackson secured his wrists with handcuffs. The derringer had skittered across the floor, coming to rest against a fallen chair. "Are you hurt?" Zachary demanded, looking up at Sophia with intense concern even as he maintained his hold on their prisoner. She shook her head, though her heart was racing and her limbs felt weak from the rush of fear and adrenaline. "I'm fine, but you're bleeding." Zachary glanced at his shoulder as if noticing the wound for the first time. "Just a graze. I've had worse." He turned his attention back to the ace, hauling him roughly to his feet. "You're under arrest for the murder of Thomas James and others, as well as the attempted murder of a law enforcement officer. You'll hang for what you've done." The ace's composed demeanor had finally cracked, his expression a mixture of fury and disbelief as he looked from Zachary to Sophia. "You should have chosen someone else," he spat at her, his earlier southern charm evaporated. "Someone who wouldn't follow you across 3 territories for revenge." Before Sophia could respond, Zachary tightened his grip on the killer's arm, forcing him to meet his gaze. "No one else survived my loneliness," he said quietly, with an intensity that sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. "No one else understood what drives a person to seek justice no matter the cost." The restaurant had emptied during the confrontation, leaving only shattered glasses and overturned tables to mark where diners had fled in panic. From outside came the sound of more commotion as Fletcher and Reeves presumably dealt with the bodyguards. Jackson approached, holstering his weapon. "The city marshal's office is 3 blocks from here. We should move quickly before this one's friends regroup or try to interfere." Zachary nodded, his face pale from blood loss but his grip on the ace unwavering. "Let's go. Sophia, stay close." The journey to the marshal's office was tense but uneventful. Fletcher and Reeves had successfully subdued both bodyguards, who now walked ahead of their employer, hands bound behind their backs. Curious onlookers gathered to watch the procession. Word of the confrontation at the International already spreading through Virginia City's efficient rumor mill. At the marshal's office, they found a harried-looking deputy who seemed uncertain how to handle the sudden arrival of 3 prisoners and 5 armed escorts. "Marshal Connors at the mine," he explained, eyeing the blood on Zachary's shirt with concern. "Some kind of dispute between workers." "Then you'll have to do," Zachary replied firmly, pushing the ace toward the cells at the back of the office. These men are wanted for multiple murders across 3 territories. They need to be secured until proper authorities can arrange transport to the territorial capital for trial. The deputy hesitated only briefly before nodding and moving to unlock the cell door. Once all 3 prisoners were secured, Fletcher and his men departed to report to their mining company employers, leaving Sophia and Zachary alone with the young deputy. "You need a doctor for that shoulder," Sophia said, nodding toward Zachary's injury, which had soaked his shirt with an alarming amount of blood. "In a moment," he replied, turning to the deputy. "I need to send telegrams to the sheriffs in Wyoming and Colorado territories, as well as to the federal marshal's office. These men need to be held securely until trial." The deputy nodded, clearly impressed by Zachary's authority despite his wounded state. "Yes, sir, I'll make sure of it." "Marshal Connor will want a full report when he returns." "He'll get one," Zachary assured him, before finally allowing Sophia to lead him out of the office and toward the doctor Fletcher had recommended before departing. The physician's office was mercifully close, a tidy establishment with an actual waiting room and examination area separated by a curtain. Dr. Milligan, a bespectacled man with a neat beard and capable hands, examined Zachary's wound with professional detachment. "Clean through the flesh, missed bone, and major vessels," he declared after inspection. "Painful and messy, but not life-threatening with proper care. You're a fortunate man, Sheriff." "I'm aware," Zachary replied, his gaze finding Sophia where she stood near the curtain, her face drawn with concern. The doctor cleaned and bandaged the wound efficiently, providing a small bottle of laudanum for pain that Zachary accepted but Sophia suspected he wouldn't use. Throughout the procedure, he remained stoic, only the occasional tightening around his eyes betraying his discomfort. "No strenuous activity for at least a week," Dr. Milligan instructed as he finished securing the bandage. "And keep it clean and dry. The last thing you need is infection setting in." Zachary nodded, carefully pulling his blood-stained shirt back on despite Sophia's disapproving look. "Thank you, doctor. Send the bill to the International Hotel." Outside, the afternoon sun had begun its descent toward the mountains, casting long shadows across Virginia City's bustling streets. Sophia took Zachary's uninjured arm, supporting him more than was probably necessary but unwilling to risk his pride by suggesting he might be weaker than he appeared. "We did it," she said as they walked slowly back toward the hotel. "We actually found him and brought him to justice." Zachary glanced down at her, a faint smile touching his lips despite the pain he must be feeling. "We did, though your brother's killer nearly escaped and I nearly failed in my promise to keep you safe." "Nonsense," Sophia replied firmly. "If I hadn't been there, he might have shot you more seriously or escaped entirely. We succeeded together, just as we planned." His expression softened as he looked at her, something deeper than respect or gratitude in his eyes. "You're an extraordinary woman, Sophia James. Your brother would be proud of your courage today." The compliment warmed her more than it should have, given the circumstances. They had completed their mission, captured the Ace of Spades, and ensured he would face justice for his crimes. The partnership that had brought them together had reached its natural conclusion. And yet, as they entered the International Hotel, neither mentioned separation or future plans. Zachary sent a telegram to Sheriff Harmon in Carson City, reporting their success and requesting arrangements for transporting the prisoners. Sophia ordered a hot bath sent to their room and a fresh shirt delivered for Zachary from the hotel's shop. By evening, exhaustion had caught up with both of them. Zachary sat carefully on the settee, his injured shoulder making any position uncomfortable. Sophia brought him a glass of whiskey from the bottle they'd ordered with dinner, noticing how the day's events had etched new lines of fatigue around his eyes. "You should rest," she said, taking the chair opposite him. Dr. Milligan was quite clear about that. Zachary smiled faintly. "I've never been good at following doctor's orders." His expression grew more serious. "We need to discuss what happens next. The territorial authorities will want your testimony for the trial. It could be months before it's concluded." "I understand," Sophia replied. I came west for justice, and I'll stay until it's done. And after? Zachary asked, his voice carefully neutral. Will you return to Boston then, to your father's house and the life you left behind? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Sophia considered her answer carefully, knowing that whatever she said would set the course for both their futures. There's nothing for me in Boston anymore, she said finally. No family, few friends who understood my decision to come west. I've been thinking. She hesitated, then continued with more confidence. I've been thinking I might stay, not in Virginia City perhaps, but somewhere in the West. It suits me better than I expected. Zachary's expression remained guarded, but something flickered in his eyes, hope perhaps, or possibility. Elko could use a schoolteacher, he said after a moment. The town council has been trying to establish a proper school for months, but qualified teachers are hard to find willing to come so far west. Are you offering me a position, Sheriff Vale? Sophia asked, a smile tugging at her lips despite her attempt at seriousness. I'm offering a possibility, he replied, setting down his whiskey glass and leaning forward despite the pain it clearly caused him. Sophia, I know our acquaintance has been brief and formed under unusual circumstances, but I've come to admire you more than any woman I've known. Your courage, your determination, your intelligence. He paused, seeming to search for words. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. Only that you consider Elko as your destination when this business is concluded. Sophia's heart quickened at his words, at the earnest expression on his weather-beaten face. And would I be considering Elko solely for its need of a schoolteacher, or might there be other inducements to settle there? A real smile finally broke through Zachary's reserved exterior. I believe the sheriff's office is conveniently located across from the proposed schoolhouse. The incumbent would likely make himself available to assist with any difficulties that might arise. How considerate of him, Sophia replied, her own smile growing. I suppose I should at least visit this Elko and evaluate its potential once our current business is concluded. Zachary reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. The touch was gentle but firm, like the man himself. I would be honored to show you everything it has to offer. It's not Boston, certainly, but it has its own beauty and potential for growth. As do many things that start in unlikely circumstances, Sophia said softly, turning her hand to lace her fingers through his. The moment stretched between them, full of promise and possibility. Then Zachary grimaced slightly as his movement pulled at his injured shoulder, breaking the spell. You need rest, Sophia said firmly, rising from her chair but not releasing his hand. The doctor was quite clear about that. Yes, madam, he replied with mock seriousness, allowing her to help him to his feet. That night, for the first time since they'd begun traveling together, Sophia left her bedroom door fully open. And for the first time, Zachary didn't sleep on the settee, but beside her in the large bed, his uninjured arm draped carefully around her waist, as if afraid she might disappear if he didn't maintain the connection. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Federal marshals arrived from Carson City to take custody of the Ace of Spades and his companions, their departure from Virginia City witnessed by a crowd that included miners, merchants, and even a reporter from the Territorial Enterprise newspaper. Sophia gave her formal statement, describing her brother's death as reported to her and identifying the ace as the man named in multiple witness accounts. Throughout the proceedings, Zachary remained at her side, his quiet presence a source of strength and stability. A week after the capture, with Zachary's shoulder healing well and all necessary legal matters attended to, they found themselves preparing to leave Virginia City. The stage to Carson City would depart in the morning, connecting there with the route back to Elko. Are you certain about this? Zachary asked as they packed their belongings in the hotel room that had become familiar over the past days. You've fulfilled your promise to Thomas. You could return east with no loose ends. Sophia paused in her folding of a shirtwaist, turning to face him. Are you trying to discourage me, Sheriff Vale? He crossed the room in 3 strides, taking her hands in his. Never. But I need to be sure this is what you want, not what you think you should want because of recent developments between us." She smiled, touched by his concern. "Zachary, I made my decision before you offered Elko as a destination. The West has changed me, opened my eyes to possibilities I never considered in Boston. Whether those possibilities include a certain sheriff is a separate matter, though not an unwelcome one." Relief and something warmer flooded his expression. "In that case," he said, releasing her hands to reach into his pocket, "I have something for you, a token of, well, of whatever this is becoming between us." He withdrew a small object and held it out to her, a silver brooch in the shape of a star, similar to but smaller than the sheriff's badge he wore. "It was my mother's," he explained as Sophia took it, turning it over in her palm. "The only thing of hers I kept after she passed, I thought. Well, stars are good for navigation, for finding your way, and if Elko is to be your destination, at least for now." "It's beautiful," Sophia said softly, deeply touched by the gesture and its meaning. "Thank you." She pinned it to her traveling dress, where it caught the afternoon light streaming through the hotel window. Zachary watched her with an expression that made her heart beat faster, part admiration, part wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I've spent years alone," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Convinced myself it was better that way, safer. After Emma and the baby died, I couldn't imagine ever risking that kind of loss again." "And now?" Sophia asked, holding her breath. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching the star brooch at her collar. "Now I find myself thinking that some risks are worth taking. That loneliness might be survived, but it's no way to live." Sophia covered his hand with her own, holding it against her heart. "No one should have to face it alone," she said, echoing his earlier words. "Not you, not me." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something precious and new. Then it deepened, carrying the promise of all that might come: partnership, understanding, perhaps even love, given time and nurturing. When they parted, Zachary's eyes held a light Sophia hadn't seen before: hope, unguarded and genuine. "Elko awaits, Miss James," he said with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "Are you ready for the journey with you?" Sophia replied, returning his smile. "I believe I am." The stage to Carson City left Virginia City at dawn the next morning, carrying among its passengers a wounded sheriff and a Boston lady who had found in each other something neither had expected when their paths first crossed: a second chance at happiness. A reason to look toward the future rather than dwell in the past. As the mountains gave way to high desert, Zachary took Sophia's hand, his thumb tracing idle patterns across her palm. "You never did tell me if you'd consider that teaching position," he said, a hint of teasing in his voice. Sophia laughed, the sound bright and clear in the confined space of the stagecoach. "I believe I said I would evaluate Elko's potential first. A prudent woman doesn't commit without proper investigation." "And what would such an investigation entail?" he asked, playing along. "Oh, a thorough tour of the town, certainly. An assessment of the proposed schoolhouse. Meetings with the town council." She paused, her expression growing mischievous. "And perhaps a more detailed acquaintance with the local sheriff to ensure the safety and stability of the community." Zachary's laughter joined hers, drawing curious glances from their fellow passengers. "I believe that can be arranged, Miss James." "Sophia," she corrected gently. "After all we've been through together, I think we're well past formalities, don't you?" His expression softened into tenderness. "Sophia," he agreed, the name like a caress on his lips. Outside the stagecoach window, the Nevada landscape rolled past, harsh, beautiful, and full of possibilities for those brave enough to seek them. Thomas would always be part of her, Sophia knew, the brother whose loss had set her on this unexpected path. But ahead lay Elko and Zachary, and a future limited only by her courage to embrace it. She touched the silver star at her collar, a navigation point for the journey ahead. "Yes," she said, making her decision in that moment. "I believe I will take that teaching position, Sheriff Vale. Elko sounds exactly where I'm meant to be." The smile that spread across Zachary's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, radiant and full of promise for the day ahead. And as the stagecoach carried them toward their shared future, Sophia James knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just justice for her brother, but healing for herself in the wild, unforgiving West, and in the heart of a lonely sheriff who had survived his grief long enough to find her.